I started thinking about this, and one of the things that I realized was that when I put my work out or go to a gallery, something like that, I think the most common question I get asked is I do bowls and I vases, and I'm kind of bored with it, and I'm just kind of stuck in this round and brown world, and how do you get out of that? And I think it really comes down to this whole basic question of creativity and how you cultivate creativity. And I can tell you from my own experience, I've struggled with creativity my entire life. And one of the problems is I think kids come into the world pretty much, some come into the world with more of a creative streak than others, granted, in its genes, but everybody comes in with a certain degree of creativity, and I think our education system stamps it out. I know that was my experience, and it's taken me all this time in adulthood to kind of recover that. And so I decided what to do is to kind of go over. I'll do a slideshow, and it's all my own work, and I do that not to be, presumptuous, I think, but because I'm familiar with it and I know how these things were done and what was behind it and what motivated it. And I'll do that, and the issue is really going to be how do you get out of that round and brown thing, okay, without destroying it? Because I'm still a firm advocate. I mean, one of my favorite books when I started, and I'm self-taught, so if it hadn't been for Richard Raffin's books, I would have never done this. Okay, I succeeded at this because I bought lathes in the summer. I had the summer, and I had 3 classes scheduled for the fall to do wood turning. And if that doesn't get your ass going, nothing will. So Richard Raffin was the guy that I, depended on, and it's still one of my favorite books that I keep on hand all the time is this little book he did on bowl design. If you've not seen this, I'd get it, okay? It's a wonderful book that deals with all aspects of bowl design, and it's filled. In fact, I copied all of his diagrams, these line diagrams of all the classic forms that are out there. I made a poster out of it, and I posted all over my woodwork shop at school, and when we would learn to turn, I would say to the boys, pick one of these and stick with it and don't deviate from it, because what my discovery was that with high school boys, the first thing they'll do when they get on a lathe is they'll turn something that looks like it came out of a Minecraft game session, okay? It looked like it's a weapon, okay, to beat over somebody's head. So I'm still a real firm proponent of classic bowl design, or shapes and forms. And I think we were talking about that before. All of these things are bowls and vases, okay? And when I do these, I pretty much adhere to those classic designs, those profiles. And George gave a wonderful thing about, design a couple of months ago. If you didn't see it, I think it's worth looking at, really, his presentation. What I started doing, really, how I got off on this whole thing of round and brown, I think, is I started just experimenting with texture, okay? Because, if you look at some people, I found a couple of quotes here that were kind of interesting. The great art critic John Ruskin once said, he said that the human element in art is most clearly seen in attention to nuances and details, okay? I believe that, okay? So it's a matter of taking a classic form, I think, and adding texture and detail to it. And it's still round and brown, but it has some detail in it, okay? And that's pretty much everything I do or have done. And this is kind of an evolution of what I've done. Gaudi, the great Spanish architect, said at one point, the straight line belongs to men, the curved one to God, okay? Again, classic forms, curved forms, okay? And then one other quote that I thought I'd bring up that I ran into, this got me reading, okay, thinking about this whole idea of round and brown and creativity. I started running into stuff I hadn't read for a long time, and I bumped into the Italian poet, turn of the century up to the Second World War, Marinetti. He was the founder of the Italian futurist movement. okay, which has some similarities to what's going on now with the tech bro guys out of Silicon Valley and their approach to aesthetics and their whole notion of transhumanism, okay? And I thought I'd read this because, not to get political, but this was written as part of a manifesto that he wrote of futurism, and then he later became, he helped write Mussolini's manifesto for fascism, okay? And I started reading through it again. I hadn't read it in years, and it's frightening, okay? This is what he said about art, okay? He said that any work of art that lacks a sense of aggression can never be a masterpiece. Then he went on to say in the manifesto, together we will destroy the museums, the libraries, every type of academy. Together we'll glorify war, the world's only hygiene, militarism, patriotism, the destructive gesture of freedom bringers, beautiful ideas worth dying for, and scorn for women. That was written in the 20s, okay? And I just say that just to, you know, when people say art can't influence the world, there's a perfect example, okay? It's a manifesto, and I think it's something everybody needs to take to heart. I'm going to go through some slides. I'll try to blitz through them. What we're going to do into the lead class, and I'm going to do this right now after I do the slideshow on the lathe, we're going to focus on these little things, okay? Little pots, little bowls, tiny little things that are made out of scraps, and there's a whole bunch of them over here, okay? When Tom Olachu bought my big old VB36 lathe last year, it was like a liberation for me because I didn't feel obligated anymore to get on and put these big-ass pieces of wood on that are spinning at, 300 miles per hour or whatever and tearing up my shoulder. So it kind of liberated me, and what I enjoy doing now is small things. And I kind of discovered that doing these little things, and I'll show you how I do one of these, and we're going to do these in the LET class. I think it's a great way to study or get exercise in doing all kinds of things, including hollowing. And for the lead class, I made these little hollowing tools, okay, out of Allen wrenches. Okay, they're just bent with a torch a little bit, bent back and then sharpened on the end. And I use these I've got about 8 or 9 of them. I use them to hollow all these little pieces that are here, okay? So it's a great way, I think it's a great way to practice hollowing, okay, without destroying a big piece of wood, okay? And for every 5 here, I usually blow through the bottom, and you blow through the bottom and, get something like this, which on a piece of wood like this, you throw it in the corner and then go on to the next one. So that's what I'm going to do. And then I want to show some stuff on surface textures, okay? So after I do that as quickly as possible, I'll sit down here and show some of these tools, which a lot of people I think are interested in, but you don't want to make the investment in a thing that you don't understand or have never used before. So if you want to come up and try some of these things, there's a micro motor here with a lot of bits that I've got here. There's one here that I really love. It's made by Ryobi, and it uses their 18-volt batteries, which I have for a bunch of other power tools. And it's battery driven. I can get about 3 or 4 hours out of one 4-amp-hour battery, and it works pretty much just as well as the micrometer, and you can get them for about $65 if you look online for the whole thing, okay, with a battery. So I want to show some of those because that's pretty much all that I use on these pieces, okay, is tools like this and a wood burner. So I'm going to take this thing, we're going to wood burn a pattern in it with a wood burning tip, okay, scrub it a little bit with a wire brush, okay, and then paint it with black gesso, which artists use to seal up a canvas before they paint on it. They typically use white gesso, but you can get black gesso. Paint it with that, that'll seal it up. And then there's this wonderful paint that Golden makes that I just discovered by accident. It's an acrylic paint. It's called micaceous iron oxide. It's really expensive. It's about $29 for a bottle like this, but it goes a long way. And it has mica particles in it, tiny little mica particles in it. Okay, it's gray, looks like battleship gray. And when you paint it on, it has a sparkle to it. And the great thing about it is I discovered by accident, so if you take a colored pencil to it, okay, it pulls the pigment off the colored pencil kind of unevenly. So if there are oddities in the texture, like something like this, okay, it'll pick up the texture and gives this beautiful thing that looks like, I think they look like woven baskets, okay, when you're done with them. So that's what we're going to do in the LET class, is try to bang out a couple of those, okay? And I think it's a great way to practice some of this stuff. So let me do slides, try to bang through those. And if you know, I was thinking about things that I found that helped me stay on track with addressing this creativity business and the round and brown thing and escaping the round and brown cycle. I came up with a list of things that work for me, okay? And I'll just read through them, okay? And you know, you may already know this, you know, bear with me. I think the first thing that I've learned is you'll cultivate more creativity, I think, and imagination if you don't look at the lathe as a be-all and end-all tool. Okay, just because you have a lathe doesn't mean you have to make every piece of wood that you find round or perfectly round. It's one tool in a toolbox of tools, okay? And there are times when I make some of this stuff that I use the lathe for just a small part of it, maybe making a finial or a lid or something, but it's not the be-all and end-all, okay? And I think if you keep that in mind, you start doing things you normally wouldn't do, okay? And you know, you fight the boredom with doing the same thing over and over again. Another thing, what's this? When you see a piece of wood, whether from a natural setting or cut by someone, don't feel compelled to make it round. If there's natural imperfections in it, in the piece of wood, don't try to perfect them. And I guess an example for me is finding a crack in a piece of wood, a beautiful crack, and then filling it with resin and turquoise chips, okay? Because in the end, I think it looks like a crack that was filled with resin and turquoise chips. And there's other ways to deal with that if you think out of the box a little bit. I mean, I brought this great big chunk of, you know, eucalyptus burl here, this gimlet. It has these beautiful cracks in it, and I was thinking at first to fill it up with resin and stuff, and I said, you know, why would I do that? So I took a wood burner to it, and if you look at it closely, I just sprinkled brass powder in it that came off of filing pieces of brass in my shop that I saved. And if you sprinkle those little brass bits in there and then put a thin cyanoacrylate on it, it bonds it and it solidifies it, and I think they look like veins of gold in a piece of rock, and as opposed to a crack that you've tried to fill with something unnaturally. So that's another one that I kind of, you know, say to myself a lot, okay? If there's too many flaws to make a go of the thing, okay, then I think what you can do is you can try to find ways to incorporate the flaws, okay? And I think an example would be this piece right here, this piece of holly. They had this great big crack in it, and I said, you know, why am I going to try to remove that crack or throw the piece out? So, you know, I took a grinding tool, a micromotor to it, and just, you know, shaped it down so that the crack is actually an integral part of the piece. And people seem to like these. Crack and all. What else? Another one. Yeah, try not to approach the piece of wood with an engineer's mindset of making a blueprint and following it meticulously to completion, okay? The exception to that, I think, is probably segmented turning, where you pretty much have to, which I've not dived into, okay? And I think there you need to have a plan and stick with it, if I'm not mistaken. Is that, I know Tim is that accurate? Yeah. Okay. So, but otherwise, you don't need to go to according to the blueprint. I think one of the things that we all love about the lathe is that it's so spontaneous, that you change directions every step of the way. You start with this plan, and then all of a sudden the wood looks back at it and he says, screw you, I'm not going there. And then you make adjustments. So I think that's a little guideline to keep in mind, is just don't let it flow, let the wood speak to you. And I think most of us know this from experience, okay? But you still try to overpower it by overpowering it with a plan, okay? And I don't think it works that way on the lathe. Don't be in a hurry to impose your will on the piece of wood. There are pieces of wood, and I'm sure you've all had this experience. There's pieces of wood that I've had sitting on the shelf for 5 years and stared at and say, what the hell am I going to do with this? I can't throw it out, okay? And a perfect example of that probably would be this chunk here. This is a root wad that I dug up years ago. I can't even remember what the tree was, but it's upside down now. And it's the root wad, and I stared at it for probably 5 years. And then just by accident, I was messing around with a little carving of a little flower, and I just dropped it on there, and I looked at it and said, holy shit, that's exactly what it's going to be. And that's where that came from. So I could have thrown it out or burned it. So trouble is, it fills up the house. And, then my wife, well, she's good because she's a fiber person. So she's got fiber sheep yarn every place. Every morning I get up and I find tufts of wool sticking out of every orifice in my body. So she can't complain to me. So that I'm lucky in that regard. Okay, with this stuff accumulating. Another one is that I think you need to learn the traditional rules and then master them. Things like Raffin's stuff here, those profiles and the classic forms and whatever, and the traditional way to do things. Learn them, master them, respect them, and then break them. I think is the key, but not until you've learned them. I think. I don't think it makes any sense to break the rules until you've learned them, really. I think they had this wonderful exhibit at the Cleveland Art Museum of Picasso's etchings over the years, and I don't know if anybody went and saw it. It was a fantastic exhibit showing how he evolved, and it's exactly what it showed, is that this guy was a master of the rules and traditions, and then broke all the rules. And whether you like his work or not, he never just dove in at the deep end without a mastery of traditional forms. So that's another one. And then I think I ended by saying Round and Brown is not boring unless you ignore detail and nuance, okay? Because it isn't. And I think architects, George might, if you have objection to this, I think architects know this, and they know that when you design a minimalist building, the most important thing is the detail, because the detail just jumps right out at you. And I think a good example of that would be, the great German architect Marcel Breuer, who gave us a wonderful tubular steel furniture, first really contemporary furniture, and designed, if you're not familiar with his work, he designed the first edition of the Cleveland Art Museum, which is that black and white horizontal striped building that looks almost brutalistic and whatever, but he was a cabinet maker when he started teaching at the Bauhaus in Germany before the war, and he, when he would design a building, he would design the building, the concept, the big thing, and then he'd go right to the details, and he would design the hinges, the door handles, the handrails, and all of that stuff. So I think it was just testimony to the fact that you can do Round and Brown stuff and not get upset by the fact that you're stuck in a cycle or in a rut, okay, if you start paying attention to detail, okay? Okay, let's look at some slides. I'll try to bang through these, okay? There we go. When I started thinking about this, I found some pictures of cars, and I thought, boy, this is a pretty good example of different attitudes towards aesthetics, okay? You've got, I think, I don't know this year, I think 1939 Chevy pickup truck, somewhere around there, a 1958 Edsel, I think it's a 1958 Porsche, and then everybody knows this guy here, and I hope I don't offend anybody who's got a Cybertruck, okay? I read a great article by an art critic, a guy by the name of Ted Gioia, who hates the Cybertruck and considers it to be such an abomination that it amounts to the de-beautification of everyday life, he says. It's an interesting article, whether you agree with it or not. But he used the amusing example of Guy de Maupassant, the French writer, who hated the Eiffel Tower. And he hated it so much that every morning he would go to the Eiffel Tower and sit at the cafe under the Eiffel Tower and have breakfast. And when they asked him why isn't there a contradiction? He said, no, it's the only place I can go in Paris without having to look at the goddamn thing. And Joya, in his article about the Cybertruck, makes the same point. He says, the person that's driving the Cybertruck is the only person out in the everyday world that doesn't have to look at it. Everybody else has to look at it. So I just threw that in because I thought it was amusing. And if you look at things like design, like cars, and then there's the Edsel, of course, and probably everybody's got their opinions about the Edsel. Anyway, architecture. You look at architecture, you can get, just look at architectural designs and you'll see little inspirations for stuff that you're turning, okay? You've got the brutalists who, dealt with these pure forms, okay? Concrete, all concrete. Some people say it looks like a prison. Then you have Gaudi, who did, his cathedral, his Familia Sagrada Cathedral in Barcelona, which is still under construction. So many years later, and other work by Gaudi that, just dealt with, but they're all buildings, okay? These are all vessels, okay? Let's go through here. Okay, like I say, I'm still a proponent of classic forms, okay, of round and brown. I'm happy that I can do round and brown. So here's a bowl, okay, that I did for somebody out of a tree at their parents' place. And here it is too, but you can see I start getting bored with the classic forms there, but I start getting bored underneath and start experimenting with stuff like this. This is wood burning, okay, just texture. So I started adding textures, okay. Here's another one with just a little texture added around the rim, but it's still a classic form, okay. And I think a nice form, actually. It's one of the ones I wish I would have kept. There's another one that just had a big platter that's about 20 inches in diameter that, that has texture on it. And I broke up a lot of these into little groups that I kind of realized were there. The first group was odd-shaped pieces of wood. What do you do with them, okay? And I think the first thing you do is you don't throw them away. Say they're not conducive to making a vessel, because here's this piece that looks like a propeller, okay? And it turned out to be, I think, a really nice bowl that actually somebody bought. Here's another piece. It was a slab from a tree that a friend had to have taken down on a family property that, the 3 generations of the family had been on it, and they wanted a memento. So, I said, why try to turn this thing into a bowl? It's a beautiful piece of wood, and I just started playing with it and put these little sprouts on top, and here's the other side. There's a little pocket that was natural in here, a imperfection in it, and she's actually put a little knit bird in it, which actually looks kind of nice. So just because it's an odd shape doesn't mean it can't be turned into some sort of vessel. Just a bud vase, okay, with this gnarly piece of wood. These were little coffee tree burls that I picked up. I had no idea what the hell I was going to do with them, but they just looked like something that was worth keeping. And another thing, they just sat around for 5 years, and then finally, somehow this evolved, okay, just by accident. Another piece of odd-shaped wood, just a cutoff on a piece of yellow heart burl, okay, from Australia, that I picked up and never really knew what to do with it. So, okay, nothing turned on it except these pieces that hold the candles, okay, and I kind of like doing things that are multi-purpose, because that's the old, my dad speaking over my shoulder to me still years after he died, saying, what's the use of this thing? What's the function? And so I still like to make things that are functional, and this could be used as a votive candle holder or candlesticks, depending on what these inserts that you put, and that's all turned. Okay, here's a piece of walnut root burl that I didn't bring along because it's about this big in diameter. It took me a whole day to power wash and get all the stones out of it, and then finally threw it on the big lathe and turned a bowl out of it because it looked like it was going to be good for nothing. So with a little bit of enhancement and a little bit of surface texture, you can see there's still a stone embedded in it because it was underground. And it actually won first place on the Chagrin Valley juried show years ago. So it's one I've kept, okay? Again, cracks. It just kind of enhanced a little bit with the wood burner to put a little bit of texture down in there and a little bit of contrast. Here's another stone that was embedded in it. So it wasn't a fun thing to turn on the lathe, especially when you hit the stones. Here's a piece that's right here that I was talking about. This is this Australian gimlet burl, okay, that has all these beautiful cracks in it, and I just sprinkled the brass powder into it, okay, and I don't know, I think it worked. It's one that I won't get rid of, it stays in the house, and it's just this beautiful piece of wood that if you had turned this down, you'd lost all of that, okay, and you'd end up with a piece about this big. So sometimes I think you just leave the wood the way it is, because there's no way you can improve it, I think. There's some of the brass particles in there. Okay. Here's another piece that's just odd shaped. It was just a cut off from a log or something, and it finally turned into this. Another piece of burl, another one here, and then some more Australian burl. Here's another one. It was, it's just this odd piece that I just had to pick up, okay, and finally threw it on the lathe. And as you probably know, if you've tried pieces like this, you know that it's a real quick lesson on using the tool rest as a boundary that you don't cross. Here's another Australian burl that had a big hole in it, okay. Another one that just sat around for years, and I finally just put it on there, and I guess I called it the hole with the bowl, or bowl with a hole, and put this hammered brass on it and actually put that on the base just as an enhancement. And you could actually pluck it and it plays a note. It goes twang. There's another shot of it. Here's an Australian burl piece that, was huge, irregular, odd shape, okay, and you'd think, that's not a bowl. It doesn't have a bowl shape, but you put that on there and let the rest of it speak for itself. Here's this burl that I picked up years ago that actually was a double burl that came off of a tree, and I could never figure out what to do with it. And, the thought was, I'll split it, okay, turn it into two bowls, and then finally realized that it'd make a really nice tabletop. So I just took dowels, and those are dowels that are that make the table base. Here's more stuff that's just odd shapes, okay, that otherwise would sit around or probably be discarded or whatever. Then there's Asymmetry, I think, as another group I found, okay, and this piece is sitting up. I think I did a demo here during COVID on making this thing. It's turned off center, okay, so that it preserves these flat parts, but then puts a kind of a quarter or half round on the rest of it. Okay, still a turned vessel. Okay, here's the part that has all the gnarly stuff in it. Okay, odd shapes. Here's some more odd shapes that were turned off center, so they're partially round. Okay, and then fluted with a gouge or a skew chisel, and then burned. Okay, another one that's asymmetrical. Okay, like I said, I like to do functional stuff, but I tend to put glass vases that I pick up at a dollar store for $1 into them, so you can put stuff in them. Here's something that's not round, okay, but still it's a vessel, I think. And I think don't look at stuff that is not conducive to turning on the lathe if you can carve it out, okay? I think it's still a vessel. Here's a piece of holly that, like the piece that was up there, okay, that I made for somebody with a glass insert in it that's, let's move on. Here's a trio I just took out to a gallery. This is the small piece that's sitting over here as part of the trio. These are not turned on the lathe, okay? The only thing that's turned on the lathe, and I think this is part of my argument that the lathe is just one tool in a toolbox of many, okay? That it's not the be-all and end-all. Because what you'd normally do if you had that attitude is you take these things and you turn them around, and you'd lose a lot of that character, that natural trunk, okay, on that holly tree. And so these are just carved with a spoke shave. So we use the lathe as a vise. Just mount the pieces between centers, okay, put a base on them, cut a base on them, take a chuck hold, and then bore a hole through it on the lathe, okay? So the lathe was used to bore the hole down into it. You can see the hole down in here, and then all of this tapering that looks like a trumpet bell was then, just cut in with a burr like this, okay, and then textured, okay? So if I would have turned those around, I think they would have been a blowout, okay? First of all, they would have been half the size that they are, and all of that beautiful, those beautiful curves that are in the natural piece of wood would have been lost, okay? Here's another one that's sitting over here, that big crack in it, okay? Same thing, just shaped with the spoke shave, okay? And doesn't take very long at all. Here's another set of them, okay? Here's one, the ones on the top were carved with a spoke shave. The ones on the bottom were turned on the lathe completely on multiple centers. So they have kind of an asymmetrical shape because they were turned on different centers, about 3 different centers, okay? And actually, I think the ones that follow the natural form of the trunk actually are nicer aesthetically, okay? Just following the natural form with a spoke shave. Here's some pieces that are not round either, and I looked at these for quite a while. They came out of a scrap bin at West Penn Hardware Woods, and they were just beautiful pieces of wood, but I could never figure out what to do with them. Again, if I would have put those on the lathe and turned them around, I think I would have lost the beauty of those pieces of wood, the natural beauty of those pieces of wood. It would have been gone. They would have been half the size. And here's another piece that's non-round, okay? These are just pieces of mahogany that I picked up at Woodcraft years ago from Mike Nowak. They were guitar maker rejects. They all had little flaws in them, so he was selling them really cheap in slabs like this. And I've made a bunch of lamps like this that turn out to be really nice arts and crafts lamps, okay? And they're not round, although there's still round elements in them that are turned on the lathe. So the lathe is always in these things, I think. Okay, there's very few that don't have the lathe in them. Here's just natural birch logs, okay, with the lathe turned top on them. Another piece that's not round with a bowl turned into it and just preserved. Otherwise, it would have been, all of this would have been gone, and all those beautiful defects would have been gone if it had been turned round. Okay, another one, Australian burl. It was just kept the way it was, right out of the sawmill, and I think that would have all been lost. And then just follow the grain, okay? It's one of the things I've really enjoyed doing is when I don't know what else to do, just follow the grain. It's like following the money and corruption. Just follow the grain because it really normally doesn't mislead you. Here's some buckeye burls that I just, I collected and then finally turned into candle holders. Here's a couple of those turned upside down, facing each other with a brass stem between them. Actually, I think looking back on this, I think this actually approaches the 1958 Edsel in that first shot I did of it. It sure has that look. Like, who the hell designed this? And what were they thinking? Here's a piece that's not round either, but it's still turned on the lathe, okay? The two curves were turned on the lathe in a single chuck, okay, without reversing anything, okay? And then just kind of used to display a seashell. There's a non-round thing that was just made out of a section of cedar log that was just hand carved and then decorated with some, I guess I was looking at what's his name, the French impressionist. Can't think of his name now. Some of his paper cuts, non-round, okay, right out of the sawmill, okay, and all of it, again, non-round, just a piece of burl that would have amounted to nothing. It was two pieces, and just cut them and put a piece between it, and I think it makes a really nice little dish. These pieces I did years ago. They're northern white cedar. I spend the summers up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where that's the predominant tree. Nobody uses it for wood turning, and I said, why the hell not try it? And I tried it, and I love working with it. It's really soft. You can burrow into it like this with a micromotor, a Kutzall burr, and in no time you've got this beautiful, almost looks like a wax-like surface. Okay. Grouping things, okay, it's another little thing I found, okay. Mike Nathal did that nice demonstration on the off-center turning and did a bunch of these little pods, okay, and I went home and said, gee, I got to try that. So these were all turned on a couple of centers. And then, I was looking at them, I said, just as a singleton, it's just, it's kind of an interesting oddity, but why not put a group of them together? So, once I put the group together, all different ones, they kind of took off as a feature. Here's more holly. Here's these beautiful pieces that came. They're Australian red gum burls, and this is right out of the sawmill too. Okay, and I never wanted to cut them down because they were so beautiful, just the wood the way it was. More examples of that. Here's another one with Mike's little inspiration, okay, for these pieces. And, I put these together, and I've had these in here. I put them together, mounted them as a trio, and then my wife looked at them and said, you need to make a little tiny one off at the end that's looking off into the abyss, okay? And that's exactly I've got it at home, and about 2 months later, I had a heart attack. That's what I finally titled it, Looking into the Abyss, Pondering the Abyss. Okay, this one actually, Bob Toop and I came here together in my car, and I brought it here for show and tell, and I put it on the roof of the car because we were packing other stuff in the car, and I forgot it like I usually do, and I put stuff on the roof, and we were driving down the road going home, and all of a sudden I heard a scratch on the roof. We heard a scratch, and I looked in the side view mirror, and there it was, bouncing along the center strip, going 50 miles an hour, just blowing apart. But we found all the pieces, oddly enough, and I remade it. So lamps. I found that if you've got odd pieces of wood that you don't know what to do with, a lamp is a perfect use for them, I think. This is just a simple birch log, okay? Just with a hole bored through it, again, on the lathe, okay, with a long drill, and turns into a nice lathe. Here's a piece of red gum. Again, just a square piece, didn't know what to do with it, didn't want to turn it down because I knew I'd lose half of it in turning, and it turned out making a really nice lamp. Here's a cedar log, okay, that used to be an old dock post up in Michigan, okay, been sitting around for probably 30 years. And had this huge crack in it, so with a little bit of carving, it turned into a nice lamp. It would have been useless for a vase or something. Here's some burl that I just like these pieces of burl, but didn't know what to do with them. And then finally, they made really nice lamps. In fact, both of these lamps are made from the same piece of burl. This piece here was cut off of this one to make it a little bit more symmetrical or balanced. So this one piece of burl actually turned into two lamps. So if you got stuff sitting around that you don't know what to do with, consider a lamp. Okay, here's the cast-offs from the guitar maker, these mahogany slabs that I think turned into a nice arts and crafts style lamp. I made one for somebody, a floor version of it that's in a Frank Lloyd Wright kind of designed house that the architect did for himself, and couldn't find any. He was looking for a floor lamp and couldn't find anything, and finally saw this, and I made one for him that was about 5 feet tall, and it just fit beautifully into that house with those natural forms in the house. Here's another burl. I had no idea what to do with this. Most of it would have been lost if it would turn on the lathe. So it just got sliced. This is the way they sliced it off the tree. More burls that were turned into lamps. Here's a bunch of olive wood slabs that I picked up that just I could never figure out what the hell to do with them, and they finally became a lamp. So if you're wondering about what to do with a piece of wood that you like but you don't know what to do with, really think about lamps, okay? Because they're not that hard to make. Here's another pair of lamps I made for somebody. This is actually like that. This is carved. So this is, again, just surface embellishment on, traditional forms, okay? These were carved, and then this is burned in the background. They were just traced onto this cedar log, from, actually I think I just copied some ginkgo leaves that I picked up outside and copied them and then put them on here. Jewelry. If you've got odds and ends, little bits of wood that are left over from stuff, really consider, jewelry, okay? Just because we're wood turners doesn't mean we can't be jewelers. And, these are just scraps of ebony that were cast off from some other project, okay, that I keep in a box, and once in a while I'll go at them, and they make beautiful pieces of jewelry. Here's another one. Here's just a seashell and a piece of brown ebony, okay, that was a little piece about this big. Okay, so consider jewelry as a way to use some of the scraps, okay? There's just a piece of driftwood that's carved into a piece of brown ebony. I think this is, I'm laying out on the table, this is just a piece of cast off ebony. I think this is from a pen blank that was kind of broken, okay? And this is all turned on the lathe and then hollowed out on the inside, and these are pine needles that are glued in there. Again, same thing, all turned on the lathe out of scrap. These are porcupine quills, okay? I've got a can full of, okay, I never know what to do with. So jewelry's a nice way to, use some of this stuff. These are just ginkgo leaves that are carved out of a piece of padauk, okay? Just a scrappy piece lying around about this big and about this thick, okay? This is using the same method with this colored pencil, okay? These are just scraps that came off of a vase, okay, just the end piece, and burned and then and done in the same method here. Here's what I'm going to do here is we're going to make one of these little things that are hollow turned. These are all examples of that, and I need to move through these. This is the same method as I showed you with the coloring. Here's different examples of that, and then hopefully I'll have a little time to get into this thing with these. I use a company called Modern Masters that makes these metallic paints, and I've gotten really nice results with them. This is painted with a primer that they sell to kind of keep the tannins from leaching out, then painted with the metallic paint, which actually has either copper, iron, or bronze particles in it, and then while it's wet on the second coat, basically it's sprayed with an oxidizing agent, and within about 15 minutes it verdigris, just like it's been out there for 20 years in the weather, and it's kind of a neat thing to see. Usually I find if I brush it with a wire brush afterwards, I get a nicer effect. So this is the same method, okay? The patterns are burned in with a wood burner first, okay, before it's covered with the primer and the paint. Okay, here's some more examples. Here's a tube. This is what it looks like before, all the treatment with the wood burning, and then, I've posted these on the World of Wood Turners website, and you get these comments that say, God, I'd really like to know the meaning of the patterns. They look like ancient relics. They must have a meaning, and I guess my response to that is the meaning is, I sit on the couch with the thing and a pencil and just start scribbling like I'm sitting in an 8th grade Latin class that I'm bored shitless in, and have a piece of paper and just start doodling all over the piece of paper and try not to let the teacher catch me. So that's the meaning, I think. There's a trio of them. Okay, this is milk paint. Okay, comes in a pouch. I found, and it's great stuff for covering just about anything. Okay, and it gives you that nice flat look. It looks like milk actually, and It's a fantastic finish. Great for Windsor chairs. We used to make Windsor chairs at school, and it was the choice to paint that with. So if you've never messed with milk paint, try it. It's a wonderful surface. Best stuff to buy is the brown pouch, paper pouch. Okay, company's old-fashioned milk paint, and it comes out with a nice flat color, and you can mix it. You can mix it to any consistency to be more transparent, more opaque, or whatever, just by how much water you put in it. Okay. The stuff that comes in a can, I found not as nice because it has kind of a shine to it. Looks kind of plasticky instead of this real nice flat chalky color. Okay. Here's milk paint applied to some bowls on the outside of bowls. So these are just scored with a skew chisel while it's spinning to make these little scored marks, and then painted with milk paint, with a couple of coats of milk paint. And on this, I just spin it after it's done, take a wire brush, like a brass wire brush while it's spinning, and just go over the milk paint lightly, and it exposes some of the wood underneath, and you get this nice contrast between the milk paint, the flat milk paint, and the wood underneath it. Here's more of the metallic paints with the oxidizer. Here's another piece that's just was a crappy piece of wood. And said, how am I ever going to turn that into anything? And then you start decorating the surface. Follow the grain. That's all he did, is just follow the grain lines, and then burned and textured. Okay. Here's a piece of walnut that more of that. I better get through these, otherwise I won't get on the lathe. Carving, another way to, kind of break the round and round cycle and still say round and brown. These are just carved. These are drawn onto here, carved out, or wood burned, and and then finished like a regular bowl. Here it is taken on more of an extreme with carving and burning and scoring with a skew chisel. Okay, here's some more carving. Okay, these are done the same way that tower, that vase was done. More carving of flutes on the bottom. These are bowls that I made quite a few years ago out of northern white cedar, and they make beautiful cedar salad bowls, okay, because the wood is so light. It's almost like a feather, so it's a great thing for a salad bowl. You can pick it up with 2 fingers. And here's more surface enhancement. I'm going to have to blast through these. Here's another thing, just following the grain and then coloring, okay. This was done with a laser cutter. Before I retired, I bought a laser cutter at school that we had for about a year before I left. And these were just patterns that were done in AutoCAD. Okay, just simple vector drawings, and then shot through the laser cutter with the bowl mounted. And I've been wanting to do some more, just haven't gotten around to it. Here's that piece there that's all carved. Here it is taken apart because it's got a glass. Here it is, in its first stages. I'm just going to fly through these. This was a great big burl that just almost killed me, about the size of a basketball. And every time I'd start carving the inside out, it would come apart in sheets like a laminate. Okay, and it would break out, and I'd have to start over again. Again, round and brown, but accentuated with some surface texture. Okay, same here. Wire brush as it's spinning. Pete, I think you know this one, don't you? It's different? Okay. And these, I love the Southwestern ceramic artist, Maria Ramirez, who kind of developed this black on black style of ceramic work, and just started trying to do that. This is the first thing I did, with these textures on here before I realized that mica paint was a good base for colored pencil. These 2 pieces were going to be bowls that were carved with flutes like this, and they turned out the bottom was just a rotten piece of crap, okay? Great big rotten spots in the bottom. So I'd actually gotten to carve some of these, and then this one cracked, developed a great big crack right down one of these things. So I finally took some time and finished it off, had some copper around, just hammered it with a ball peen hammer, made these little spiral things out of stainless steel rod that are hammered, and they turned out pretty nicely. These I had to cut with a coping saw, okay, each one of them, so it was a long process, okay. Again, these are just follow the grain. Sorry I have to go so fast, but you're probably welcoming the speed right now. Recently I started messing around. My wife is a fiber person, so she's got yarn and stuff, weaving and knitting and spinning all over the place. And I just started stealing some of her yarn, and I did these little grooves in these pieces and filled them with pieces of yarn, and really liked the way they came out. And they're just glued in there with thin cyanoacrylate, which holds them in place and stiffens them, so they're nice and hard and you can handle them and nothing comes out. Okay, here are the pieces that, here's another piece that was ant-ridden. And then, I've done these little pieces that I've experimented with, these pod shapes that Mike Nathal kind of showed us how to do. And these are part of, you want to look to nature as an inspiration, I think, because there's so many beautiful forms in nature. I had this piece that was kind of nice on its own, then decided to, kind of go goofy on it and started making components of a flower in it. Here's that piece that's there that I mentioned, and it sat around for 5 years until I finally realized it had a different base on it that I didn't like a whole lot. It was too tall, and then I changed the bases, and it turned out, I think, a lot better. Here's another group thing, okay, grouping these things together into a group, which changes the nature of them. Okay, here's these little pods, too, that Mike showed us how to do, and just turned them into a little setting with these odd little pod creatures, okay. There's another one. And here's some more of that yarn stuff. Finials, okay? This is kind of the standard finial that we all learn to do, okay? But you don't have to get stuck in thinking that's the only way to do a finial. So if you start experimenting a little bit, these are little pieces so that, you're not wasting anything if you make a mistake, okay? And I like doing these things with hammered steel, okay? Here's some others. These are carved, okay? These little spirals that are really easy to do out of hammered stainless steel rod. So, you don't have to be stuck on just that standard finial. Here's some pieces. These are pine needles, and this is a piece of mulberry fiber, which is a wonderful material if you ever have a chance to play with it. You can buy it in sheets. It's a branch of mulberry that paper makers use to make paper pulp. And you can get a branch of it about this big, boil it for about 4 hours, and it softens it, and you can take a hammer and pound it so that all the fibers start coming apart, and then you can start pulling the fibers apart and end up with a whole sheet of this stuff that looks like lace. It's just beautiful. Okay, and I've got a lot of little bits of those, and I've been using a lot to do things on finials. So these are all different ways to look at a finial. Here's a finial I did a couple of years ago, and I just thought, what if you could take the finial and pull it right out of the piece and put little compartments in there to put little things like seashells, and it was actually quite fun to make, okay? So a finial doesn't always have to be attached to a lid. It can actually be something that slides in and out of something. Okay, I think I did a demo here of these things, okay, with different finials on them. These pieces were all scrapped. None of them turned out right. They had blown out bottoms, and I finally saved them, and they managed to go together, and they made a really nice piece, I think. Okay, natural forms, we don't need to get into those. Okay, we need to move on here. Okay, here's some of the yarn things that I've been doing lately. Here's a piece of really crappy ant-ridden wood that I've had laying around for years, and somebody I knew wanted a centerpiece of candles for their table, and it turned out actually pretty nice. They were really pleased with it. Okay, one other thing I think is if you've got something and you're wondering about how to make a component of it like this, okay, take a picture of it and print it out and either scribble on it, draw on it with a pencil or something, or put it into a piece of software. Like if you don't have Photoshop, I use a piece of software called GIMP, which is free, and it does everything that Photoshop does, and it might be easier to use, okay? And I found that if I just take a picture of something as I'm partway through it and then just start studying different ways with very simple drawings in the program to come up with a solution. And this is, the solution I came up with. I played with the bottom curve with the base, okay? It's a really nice way to study what you're gonna do, okay, without committing to it. I made this teapot recently. First thing I did is put this ebony bar on here, and it really didn't look good. It was way out of proportion. It was clunky, and I put it in the software and just started playing with it and came up with this, and it was a perfect fit, I think, okay? Here's the little bowls, okay, that we're gonna do. Okay, and there's other examples. Now I better get on here. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna hollow one of those little bowls, okay? And hopefully not end up with. Anyway, I don't want to do this, okay? And I may very well do it, okay? So bear with me. I've got backups in case it doesn't work and we need to move on, okay? Because I can go right from here, from one of these to one that I've already made that worked, okay? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to start with a piece of dowel, and we're going to do this afternoon. I cut these up into 6-inch pieces. This is a poplar dowel that you can get at Home Depot for about 12 bucks, a 48-inch long piece, okay? And it's really nice poplar. And the nice thing about it is it's, fairly soft. So it's pretty conducive to wood burning, okay, without having to sit there and wait for the thing to reheat, okay? So I just put this in a standard chuck, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of my favorite tools, which is a little Sorby parting tool, okay, that I use for a whole lot of stuff, okay, and a skew chisel and a spindle gouge, okay. That's going to be it, I think. Yeah, I think so. We'll get rid of the rest of these. And the thing I found, here's a commercial hollowing tool that would work with this, okay? This is one of my other standbys. It's an old Glazer, one of the original Glazer tools, okay? It's a little a bowl gouge that's almost seen the last of its days. So I'm kind of hoarding it. And then here's a little version of some homemade ones that I made, a hollowing tool for doing something like this. And for the class this afternoon, I made a bunch of these. I made one for everybody, okay? This is just an Allen wrench. Am I on there? This is just an Allen wrench that I bent on the vise, okay? Heated it up a little bit with a torch, and it bends pretty easily, and then just sharpened the end here, okay, to get in here and hollow, okay? Basically the same thing like this, but, no cost for an old Allen wrench and a piece of PEX tubing and a dowel rod, okay? And they're very quick to make. So I'm just going to take this and try to hollow this. I'm going to make a chuck hold on here, because this piece should serve to make about 3 of those little pots there, different shapes and sizes, okay? And I'm going to do a chuck hold that you're probably not used to seeing, and I've been chastised by various professional wood turners about using this. Here's the way I do these, and you're welcome to try this, and you're welcome to tell me I'm crazy and this is a stupid way to do it, okay? I'm just going to take a skew chisel, okay, and I'm just going to make my chuck hold. I got to be careful because the chuck doesn't go much smaller than this. I'm just going to use the skew chisel to make the dovetail. Let's get it round. I think I've got it. Okay, that's going to be my chuck hold. Now, instead of that shoulder being the bottom of the piece or the bowl, I'm going to waste a little material here. I'm going to take my parting tool, clean that up a little bit, and I'm going to waste maybe this much material in here, okay? That's the other criticism I've gotten. It says, well, it wastes material. I say, what do you mean it wastes material, okay? I'm wasting a quarter of an inch of poplar here. What's the big deal? So I'm just going to cut here. That's going to be the bottom of my vessel, okay? The vessel is going to be curved this way. That's going to be the bottom. And then I'm just going to arbitrarily decide, here are the limits that I'm going to set myself for a little bowl, okay? So I'm going to go right up to about here, okay? This is just arbitrary. Go in here again. Okay. That's the limits of my bowl. That's what I got to work with now. It's totally visible, okay? The bottom of the bowl is not going to go right up to the edge of the dovetail, okay, where I have to deal with that at the end, okay, because it's right up against the jaws of the chuck. So it doesn't matter a whole lot. I don't think it matters a whole lot what that angle of that dovetail is, really. The most important thing, I think Pete made this really clear in his demonstration, that the really important thing on this is that little cleavage right in there is sharp, and that this little surface here is not bulging outward to the right, okay? That's the important thing, I think. So let's see if I got it. Yeah, I've got a shoulder out. You see I've got a shoulder all the way. I can go a little bit deeper. I want that shoulder to be all the way around. Okay. Now let's try it. Okay, and like I say, what I've got now is I've visually got the limits of my vessel in the piece. So I know exactly what I've got to work with. Instead of wondering, let's just made it. Instead of wondering how I can shape my vessel down to here, right to the jaws, and then having to reverse chuck it at the end and then shape the bottom after I reverse chuck it, I can do all of this right now and never have to reverse chuck it. That's been my experience, at least, okay? And what it looks like in a larger form is this. I'll bring this over here. Here's a bowl, okay? And I did the same thing. This one I left a thinner area on here to sacrifice and then turned it down. So this whole thing was just turned on this one chuck hold, okay, without ever having to reverse anything or address the bottom. It was all dealt with right here, okay? And when I'm done with this, I can throw it on the lathe, hold it in my chuck, go in here with my parting tool, and I can even put a little pedestal on it if I want to by moving over to the left a little bit, or just cut right through and then have a finished bottom. Oh, this is end grain. Yeah, this is end grain, yeah. But that little piece, you know, I have no problem holding that really, and even hollowing it with that, because it'll hold. Those fibers, you know, if you mess with those fibers are incredibly strong, I think. But on here, no, I've not had any trouble with that. You mean of it shearing? I won't take it down that far until I've done the bulk of it and hollowed it. And then I'll take it down further and then finish, you know, coming in here with a parting tool to shape the bottom more. But the key is, and what helped, you know, doing this with high school boys is we never had to reverse anything. It was all done in one shot, okay, on the same chuck hold. So, okay, I'll put one, while I've got it on here, I might as well put another chuck hold down here the same way. And again, that's that crease in there is what needs to be really clean, and that face not bulging over to the right here, to my right or your left, okay? That's the important thing to hold this, okay. And then I think I'm just gonna arbitrarily pick, this will be a little taller piece, okay? So we'll just do that right here. And then since I've got the chuck holes, I'll just I've never been a real firm advocate of separating these with the parting tool. I'm too much of a chicken, I think. The thing I always do is I always, take my little nice little fine tooth saw and get in a hurry and leave the chuck or the tool rest up and then break through and then bang down onto the tool rest and, bend 3 teeth on it. So I don't know. I guess age never really, certain things you never really grow into any wisdom with. So let's take that. Let's just saw that off. Oh, I didn't do it. Okay, now let's, and I would suggest, like when we do this in a class this afternoon, depending on how much you've hollowed, if you haven't hollowed at all, then this is a good opportunity to just see what hollowing is all about, I think, and do a dish, or just a simple dish, which this will become. And I'm just going to take my spindle gouge and shape this thing. And I'm just going to shape it. Since I already know where my limits are, I can shape the thing completely, okay, without guessing, because my bottom of the bowl is right up against the jaws of the chuck. Okay, let's just round this a little bit. Get it round and brown. I think we got it round. Pretty good. And then I'm just going to start, I'll put a little bit of a undercut on it. This is the top of the bowl. It's going to be a little bowl, okay? And just do a bead. If you're learning to do this is good practice for doing beads too, with a spindle gouge. And I used to do this. I used to work with a math teacher who was a brilliant mathematician, and she taught all the advanced calculus courses, and we did a little project once where I filmed this, and then we picked it apart in terms of the math that's involved in making a curve with a skew chisel, with a gouge like this. And as it turns out, and she used it in her math classes, and she said it's the first time they understood what instantaneous rate of change is all about. Okay, so if you're a math person or a physics person, the difference between making a bevel and a bead with the gouge is, with the bead, I'll start here, and as I move to make my bead, I'm gradually rotating the handle of the tool because I want to end up in this position here, okay, vertically on its side. But as I'm doing that, I'm also cranking the tool over here, okay, to the right, and I'm also changing the rate of speed at which I do that cut, okay? So I'm going like this, and as I get further over here, I'm changing that rate of speed, so it's not a constant velocity, okay? And the interesting thing I think about it mathematically is that if you start here and don't do that instantaneous rate of change, and you just go through at the same rate, doing the same thing, you get a bevel. You don't get a curve at all. So it's that change in the speed at which you crank the tool is the difference between a linear equation y equals mx plus b, and an exponential equation, y equals x squared. It's as simple as that. If you're not a mathematician, then forget it. But anyway, if you struggle with making beads because you're new, okay, that's what you want to do with the bead. It's a 3-part motion, okay. And the other thing in making a shape like that I've always found, and I think probably everybody would agree with this who's done this, is when you're making a form like a bowl or a dish or whatever, okay, on a piece like this, you want to start from the center, from your fattest part, and work outward towards the smaller parts, okay? The worst way to not get what you want is to start at the smaller end and work towards the bigger end, okay? So you figure out where you want the fattest part of the piece to be, which I'm going to put right here, okay? And then always work from that towards the smaller areas. So I'm just going to continue doing that until I got a fairly round shape. And now I can actually remove some of this scrap material. To get in here a little bit better, okay? So I can come down. I could actually take my base down a little bit further. Again, I see exactly where the base is going to be, so now I can kind of shape to that. And come in. I can get rid of this because I'm hitting that a little bit, and then I can, use this to create that bottom. Now the nice thing about using the coloration and the texture with the wood burner, you don't have to sand it all or worry about flaws, okay? Because we're going to cover all that, okay? So, let's get a shape that we're happy with, okay? And I'm just going to take the parting tool or the skew chisel, come in here, make a little rim here. Okay, reshape that a little bit. Bring that right down into that little crease there. And I don't know, that's not such a bad shape, is it? Or what do you think? Okay, I'm going to go with that. And the nice thing about this is I can change once I've got the bottom, that's my bottom now. I don't have to worry about remounting this thing to finish off the bottom, okay? I could actually come in here and separate it, okay, with the parting tool and have, a flat bottom. I could come in here and I just take this, I have this little parting tool and I just kind of grind the sides of it too so that I have a shearing edge right on the side here, okay? And this is not the way you're supposed to use a parting tool, I think, but it works, okay? And I use it all the time. So it's got a sharp edge here. So if I just come in here and I start like this, just follow my curve, I can finish that bottom any way I want to, okay? And I can do it without having this edge right here. But it helps a little bit because it shears a little bit. And I could come in here and now decide at the end, I want this to be a round bottom. I want it to be a kind of a roly-poly little vessel, okay? And like I say, there's nothing different between doing it at this level and doing a bigger piece like this. I mean, it's the same thing, okay? It's just that if I screw this up, I've not screwed up a nice piece of wood, okay? And I get a lot of practice. So now I want to hollow this, okay? So let's bore a hole in here to start the hollowing process. Okay, which I guess is cheating in a way, but, and I'm just going to mark this. Let's see. I'm just going to use this roughly to gauge how deep I want to go with that. Actually, it's right about this point on here, so let's mark that. And I want to leave the bottom a little bit fatter on here because otherwise it gets too light, okay? So it'll sit better, okay? And let's just bore that out. Okay, hopefully I won't blow through the bottom here. I'm just going to take my skew chisel and, where's the speed here? I'm going to take my skew chisel and just start hollowing a little bit with that. Always being careful not to go to the other side here with that edge. Whoop. Because, you know, if you're not familiar with this, it'll flip it on you, okay? So I'm just going to do that. And then maybe a little fine tuning on the rim. Just make a little flared rim. And like I say, we don't have to be all that careful with the finish because this is all going to be painted and covered. Let's see if that's probably got some frame. No, it's looking pretty good. Okay, so that's, so now I find before I go in here with the hollowing tool, okay, which is going to go in like this, I find, kind of decide how deep the bowl starts right here, which is the size of that rim, the height of that rim, and then go a little bit below that and make a mark. So that's about where, that line there is about where I'm going to go in, okay? And I don't want to go any further above that because I'll break through here. So I find that the skew chisel is real handy to do this, to get started on the hollowing method, hollowing process. If I go in here like this, and mark that spot again, watching not to catch this side on the other side because it'll catch or it'll flip. And then I kind of line the tool up. I can't do it as well with this because it's too flat here, but I'll get close. I kind of line this angle on the skew chisel up with the angle on my curve. And then just start going inward like that. And what that gives me, it gives me a nice sharp border, okay, between the spout and the interior, a nice sharp line, an undercut, okay, if I start with that. And it gives me, I think it gives me a cleaner cut than going right in there with the hollowing tool. So again, I'll just come in here, I'll try to, I can't get any further over that way because I'll hit the other side, but okay, and then we can hollow this thing, be done with it. Okay, the hollowing tool, if you're not familiar with the hollowing, correct me, but all of these are pretty much the same, and the key to these is the tip needs to be in line with the shank, okay? Because if it's not, if it sticks out further like this, when you get in there, you're going to develop torque, okay, and flip the tool. But if it's perfectly in line with the shank, basically in terms of physics, you're just tricking the everyday physics world into thinking that this is just a straight shank, okay? So that's the key if you're not familiar with this. So you don't want to rest the tool, the hollowing tool, on the curve because now the tip is not in line with the point of rest or the fulcrum, okay? And it'll flip on you. Back fur enough, where'd that come from? Anyway, here, this is just a bent Allen wrench, like I said, and I just bent it back this far. Now you can make this a little differently. You can make this a little bit shorter if you bend it a little bit less so that the tip will be in line with the shank. And I want that shank to be right on the tool rest, not any further back, because the second you go back here, this thing will flip on you, okay, because of the torque, okay? And I'm just going to go in here like this, basically, and to me, the trick to hollowing is, I mean, I guess the way I learned it was to go in here, start at your center, and then pry the tool outward. And then go another step further in, okay? Do the same thing. So it's a repetitive motion, working your way down through that hole and widening the hole, okay? One step at a time. It's like ching, 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 and you're just gradually burrowing into there and widening that center hole. And again, with this piece, how small this is, you want to be careful not to hit that edge over on the rim over here, because it'll flip on you too, okay? So you gotta watch it and keep that clear over there. So now it's just a matter of and as you go into that to do the next step, you're going to find, if you've not done this before, that you always misjudge where the hole is, okay? The hole is always a little bit further that way than you think it is. So you'll go in here and think you've got the center, and you're not in the hole at all, okay? The hole's going to be a little bit further over. I don't know if it's an optical illusion or what, but I'm just getting to the bottom. And then I ground these so that it's got a bit of an edge right here on the front end, okay? So you can actually push the tool, okay, in here like this. So if I can start up here, and actually push it in and move it on a curve until it meets the bottom. And I think, as Mike will tell you, the key is always to figure out when the hell to stop. Oh, I want to get it a little bit thinner. I want to get it a little bit thinner, and then all of a sudden, bam, you see the tip of the tool, right? So I'm going to feel, that feels pretty good, actually, in there, okay? Now, if you want to cheat, the first project I always did with boys was to make a little bud vase to take home to their mother, okay? And if you want to cheat and don't want to hollow it, the best thing to do is just to take the drill, bore into it, okay, make a little rim like this, and then bevel the rim towards the hole, okay, so that it really looks like a hollowed piece, ultimately, and nobody can stick their finger in it to check it, okay? Because I think if you watch at a gallery that's filled with hollow wood turnings, the first thing the wood turner will do when they walk into the gallery is look around to see if the proprietor's looking, and then stick their finger in the piece to see how well it's hollowed, okay? So if you just bore a hole and then create the illusion that it's hollowed by tapering inward like a funnel, okay, you can avoid all that, okay? It'll be a lot heavier because it'll be a solid piece, but that's really all I'm going to do, okay? And if you're doing a smaller piece with a smaller opening up here, you're going to have to clean it out once in a while, okay? Because the stuff gets stuck in there, and centrifugal force, it just cakes up against the side, and you got to clean it out either with a compressed air or. So that's how we'd make these things, okay? And then I think out of a chunk like that, we could get 3 pieces like that. So I would say if you're new to this, you don't even put a rim on this like this and hollow it. Just make a dish, that's got a traditional bowl shape, and then hollow it without coming in under a rim like that, and just feel what that's like, okay, to hollow. Done. When I'm ready to finish this, I'm going to leave it on the chuck hold because it's going to make it easier to burn a texture into it, to paint it, and at the very end I can put it back on the chuck and just take this in here and bang, separate it, and it's done for all intents and purposes. I don't have to worry about the bottom, so I'll just come in here and if you do this a few times, you'll learn to use that parting tool so that you actually make a nice smooth surface on there. I've done it with plenty of bowls where I don't leave any line or edge at all, okay, if you're careful in the way you come in here with this, okay, and just curve it. and I don't have to worry about the bottom anymore. And then what I usually do, since I use that micromotor all the time, I'll just separate it. If I want to make a round bottom, okay, I'll just go through. If I want to make a flat bottom, I'll flatten it. I'll come in with the parting tool a little bit like this to make the bottom a little bit concave, like we need to do on a bowl anyhow. And then I'll finish it with a little burning on the bottom, or I'll burn my signature into it, or whatever, and pretty much be done. Okay, I don't have to worry about flipping it around, having a jam chuck, and all that stuff, and then coming back and turning the bottom anyhow, and then still having a damn nub on the bottom that you have to take care of or sand out. Okay, so that's my plug for chucking it this way and doing a one-step chucking process. Okay, and the other thing I think really that is one of the benefits of this is that you're working within two limits visually instead of working towards the jaws on the chuck, okay, which will always misinform what your design is, your shape is going to be, because you know that you're going to have to take it off and change the bottom a little bit, because you can't, if you go right up to the chuck jaws, okay, you still have to deal with the bottom. This way you get exactly what you've shaped, okay, and that's what comes off the lathe. So take that off. And again, with this, I could have removed more material, put more of a bevel on here so I can get underneath it even more, okay? So the more of that material you have to sacrifice up here between the chuck shoulder and the bottom of the piece, okay, the more of this you can sacrifice, okay, the more flexibility you have in shaping it from the bottom, because you can get in there from both sides, okay, just by removing some of this material in here, if that makes any sense, okay? Now, I'm going to take the wood burner, and I was going to go through a lot of this stuff, but if you want to stick around and you want to mess, if you've been thinking about using a micromotor or a wood burner or something, by all means come up here. You're welcome to try it, okay? And I've got a bunch of these little pieces. So what I'm going to do, so I'm using this coiled pen tip, okay? I'm using an old wood burner I had that I really still like, okay? This is not the one that matches the pen tips. The pen tips I get from a place called carvertools.com up in Minnesota, and he makes these himself, okay? And I think the benefit of them is in his sales pitch is that if they're hardwired into the stem, you get a lot more control over the heat, okay? As opposed to, I know Burnmaster, which I've got too, makes these red pens, okay, with two screws in it. You can make tips or buy tips and slide them in there, and you don't get as much control over the heat with it. But I burn really hot all the time anyhow, okay? I think both in my life and when I'm burning wood. And I usually have these things running red hot, okay? And I got these old ones. This Detail Master company went out of business, okay? But I still have two of them, I think. And they generate a whole lot more wattage out there, so they really burn, okay? Now, if you're a decoy maker and you're doing fine feathers on duck wings or something like that, you don't want to be burning like this, okay? They'll be burning, way down, okay? But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around here and take this coil tool, which is what they call a basket weave thing. You can make these yourself out of nichrome wire, okay? Which I have. Here's some coils of it. You can buy these like in 10-foot sections, this nichrome wire, and then just make your own tips, okay, if you've got a screw-in attachment, like on a Burnmaster, okay? And basically to make one of these coils, you just wrap the stuff, leave a stem on it to put into the bottom of the thing, wrap it around a nail, like a 20D or a 16D nail, and just wrap a coil around it, and you're done, and you've got one of these, okay? I like his because they're made out of probably 18 or 16 gauge stuff, okay? And they're really sturdy, they don't bend, okay? So I'm just gonna take it and come around here like this, and I'm just gonna burn. Can you see that? Yep. And I'm just gonna burn all the way around the piece. And again, you don't have to be real careful because this is all gonna be covered with several layers of stuff. So I think probably take me 5-10 minutes to do the whole thing, and I'm just going to go around. Okay, and I'll go down to the next step and just go around and just keep doing that until I'm done. And basically, I could have removed more material with my chuck hold here so that I had more room to get it at an angle, and I could do more of the bottom on here to come in here, okay? And that's basically what you do, okay? Now, you can get into other patterns. This one I found makes it look like a basket, like a woven basket, like a basket maker would make, okay, when you put the finish on it, okay? You can also come in there with different pen tips like this, okay? This kind of, well, you can come in here, here's one. Here's a burn master handle, okay? You always want to make sure to turn these things off before you switch pens because you can blow it out otherwise, okay? And I'll put this on. So you can experiment with different patterns in here, like I can take this guy and come in here and, can you see this? Okay, I'm going to come in here with this and just start going around like this. And just put that pattern in there, and when I get to the next row, I'll just come back and go over that and do another row like that, which really creates a very nice pattern. So depending on the tips that you have, you can really do a lot of experiments and textures with this, okay? So that's what I would do. And then, you know, since here's a piece that started. Actually, this is a piece Bob Tupa and I are kind of collaborating on. This is going to become a kaleidoscope, we hope, okay? With the peephole here and a removable on a pair of threads, a removable piece here that we can put different capsules into to get different patterns in the kaleidoscope. So we'll see how it turns out, but this is going to be done. This is the first step of doing this, of using one of these metallic paints, okay, and oxidizing it or putting a verdigris finish on it, okay? So this is where it starts, okay? So again, you don't have to be real careful with this. In fact, if you're real meticulous about putting a pattern like this on here, okay, it shows up as being too meticulous. It looks like it's engineered. And then what you would do with this piece when I've got a piece, do I have one here? Yeah. Well, here's one that's covered, okay? And the first thing I do is just paint this gesso, this black gesso on it, and it dries up real fast too. So it's a flat black. It'll let all the detail, the wood burn detail show through, okay? And then when that's dry, 20 minutes or so, I take this stuff, which is this wonderful micaceous iron oxide. I just put it in a lid like this or something because you don't need very much of it. I'll just squeeze it out into a cap like that, and then it's a thick material, and I just get bags of these little cheap paintbrushes from Harbor Freight because I use them once and I don't want to clean them. And I just throw them out, or I snip them off and I use them for little tools to put super glue on something, okay? I use a lot of bamboo chopsticks too that accumulate in the kitchen drawer after we order out for Chinese food, and they're wonderful things to make things with, okay? If you cut them up, and a lot of the leaves on that little thing, that little floral thing, are made out of chopsticks that are just shaped down or carved down, okay? And then once this is done, once you've got the micaceous iron oxide on there, then you pull out the colored pencils. I've done some experiments with them. I found that the cheaper pencils actually work better, okay? I just ordered some pencils from Amazon. They're metallic colored pencils. They're called Prismacolor Junior. And I tried a pack because they were $9 for a pack of 12. So I ordered them. I said, "What's the difference?" Well, it turns out the difference is they're called Prismacolor Junior because they're made for South America, and all the writing is in Spanish. And they're half the price of the regular Prismacolor stuff, and they're beautiful. So anyway, you you would take the colored pencil, and as you stroke this, okay, it just pulls the pigment right off the colored pencil. But you get the deeper pockets actually that are left in there that are the dark gray and that have a little sparkle to them. And I think it just comes out as a beautiful finish. If you do just this pattern with the coil, you get basically something that looks like a basket maker would make out of woven material. Okay, so that's since it's pulling waxy pigment off the colored pencil. If you brush your finger against it, you'll pull up some of that coloration. So I just use artist's fixative. Krylon makes it. You know, it's either a fixative that you spray on a charcoal painting or drawing or whatever to fix it, or Krylon makes a matte finish too. Okay, that I like. It's just a spray-on matte finish. I just kind of hold the thing, spray it on. It's dry in about a couple of minutes, and it's done. It has a nice matte finish. It doesn't change this nice finish. It doesn't change the sparkle at all. And if you rub it, you won't pull any pigment off. It's all fixed in place. The black gesso. I think I got the black gesso from Amazon. I checked the price between Dick Blick and. It's not much different, and you know, since I've got Amazon Prime, I get the free shipping. Otherwise, I got to pay shipping with Dick Blick. So that's the same thing with the golden paints. I found the prices, you know, depending on whether you get free shipping or not, the price is pretty much the same at Dick Blick as it is at Amazon.
Is that the only color of that metallic stuff?
No, they have a whole. If you look at their catalog, they've got an enormous range of colors in their acrylic paints. Okay, they've got. I think when Andy Wolf was here, she had us use some. What were they called? They're iridescent colors. Okay, they have a shine to them. But I think this is the only one that has the mica particles in it that creates. What it does nicely is it creates that textured surface. It's got a fine grit to it, and if you come up and feel one of these, okay, you'll feel the grit. It's like 400 grit sandpaper. So it's got just enough of a grit that'll pull the pigment off the colored pencils. I just stumbled onto this by mistake. And I was playing around, and I looked, and I said, well, shit. My wife said, that looks like a basket. I said, yeah. So I started playing around, and it's just a mistake. The metallic paints, here's the metallic paints. The company I've been using is called Modern Masters. Okay, you can buy it in a smaller thing. They're expensive too. I can't remember what a bottle like this is, but I use enough of it that I buy the bigger bottle. I did find that this is bronze. They make a copper and they make an iron, okay? And they have oxidizing agents for each one. They've got a rust activator for the iron paint, and then they've got a blue verdigris and a green verdigris, depending, that both work either for copper or bronze. I tend to like the copper or the bronze because it's less shiny underneath. And if you brush it after it's oxidized with a wire brush, you get some of the bronze showing through a little bit, and it, instead of the shiny copper. But you can use the paint just like it is too, without oxidizing it. The trick to oxidizing it is you use a primer, and I use their primer. They make a red primer that's acrylic that you paint onto the piece after I've put the texture in it, paint it on. And what it's formulated for is it's to keep the tannins in the wood from bleeding out into the paint, okay? So it seals it up. So you paint it with this primer, then you put a coat of the metallic, like the bronze on, let it dry, okay? You can recoat it in a half an hour, but you let it dry overnight, I usually do. And then you put a fresh coat on, and while it's wet, completely wet, you spray it with the oxidizer. I just use a fine mist like this. Okay, spray it with the oxidizer, and it starts to oxidize immediately. But the trick is that the metallic paint has to be wet for it to react, okay? And the other trick is I found it will tend to run, okay, a lot. So when I do a big piece like that, I'll mount the piece on the lathe. I keep the lathe, the piece with a chuck hold on it. Okay, and then I'll mount it on the lathe and wet it down with the metallic paint spray the oxidizer on, okay, and then turn the lathe on slow speed so the whole thing rotates nicely, and it distributes the oxidizer and mixes with the paint nicely, and you don't get blotches, okay? I found that it works a lot better when you have a texture underneath it than it does with a smooth piece. I think Mike Nathal was saying he didn't have luck with it on a smooth piece. And I think it works better when you've got texture underneath it, yeah. So I did the outside, oxidized the outside with blue oxidizer on bronze, okay? Then kind of wire brushed it, okay, to even out some of the blotches a little bit. And then on the inside, this is the rust activator. So then I painted the inside here with the iron oxide paint, okay? And then did this separately, just put tape around it, okay, to demarcate it, okay? And then did the iron oxide, wet coat that, and then sprayed the iron oxide inside that, avoiding the outside. Now, I haven't done this, but I've seen people use these, and you can get some really nice effects by mixing them. So you do part of the thing in bronze, part of it in copper, use different oxidizing agents while it's wet, okay, and they'll bleed into each other, and you get some pretty beautiful color variations between rust and verdigris.
Lamps.
Oh, lamp parts? I'll either get the threaded rod at Lowe's or whatever, I can pick them up. They're all about the same price, and but if you do a search for brass lamp parts, you'll probably find them. Okay.
Anybody else?